everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being in our EuroTalk Solidarity webinar. I'm sorry. We will talk about climate justice. This is a topic that normally is not within our comfort zone in the European Solidarity Corps Resource Center. However, we think it's quite important. We think it also determines a lot of things and shows the solidarity in many, many other aspects that we are not always tackling in our daily work. So EuroTalk Solidarity is also doing at the same time that the COP30 is happening in Brazil right now, which of course we coordinated that with them. But to be more specific about our webinars, this is the fourth season. Normally we did the seasons always in December. December is the month of solidarity, but this year we decided to make it a little bit different. So we have a series of 3 webinars, one in October that already happened, this one, and we will have a last one in December. And I would like, before we get started, to thank as well our colleagues, Tali and Elizabeth, for the facilitation, for being here. Also to my colleague Romina from my research center, my colleague Enrique from Inclusion and Diversity, SALTO Inclusion and Diversity in Belgium. And of course, our speakers, Andrea, Salvatore, and Imar, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing with us your knowledge and important things you would like to say. I will pass the voice to Enrique because you are also here. And once again, thank you all of you who are present. And as you know, we are recording this. We will also publish it after the last webinar. Enjoy.
Well, thank you, Miguel, and hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar series on climate justice and solidarity. My name is Enrique from SALTO Inclusion Diversity Resource Center. We were quite excited this year when we got the opportunity to co-organize this series of webinars with colleagues from SALTO European Solidarity Corps Resource Center. We have been working on the topic of climate justice for a couple of years now, still taking our first steps or baby steps, because most of our work is focused on supporting young people with fewer opportunities. So when fight against climate change and the green transition became these priorities or these buzzwords in the European programs, we were paying attention to that and say, okay, let's see what's there and let's see how we can connect this green side with the inclusion and diversity sides. So since then, we have been exploring. We had recently a research and a study on this topic. We started also with training activities. We're now also working to influence policymakers in having climate justice as a priority in the next European youth programs. But yeah, I recognize there's still a long way to go, but being part of this webinar and also seeing so many of you interested in this and being here also gives us a lot of confirmation that this is really a very important topic that we need to pay attention at. So yeah, excited to be here. Hope you will be also getting inspiring and enjoyable 1 hour and a half with us. So back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting us. And maybe also just a very small glimpse on who is with us. We received registrations from many people all around Europe and beyond, coming from the youth field as practitioners, as researchers, as working as youth workers, being young people themselves, but also related in some ministerial departments, non-governmental organizations. So a very diverse and interesting audience. And I hope that you can also take some of the information with you and bring it to your own context. So I will not talk too long. I will pass immediately to our first speaker of today, Salvatore Paolo De Rosa, and he will share some results from research with us, and he will take us a bit back in history on the different aspects of climate justice movements. So we are very curious to hear from you, Salvatore, and are happy that you managed to be with us today.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. And also thanks a lot to SALTO for organizing these webinars and for inviting me to be with you today. So I prepared the presentation to support my talk, and I'm going to share it with you right now. So it should be, yes, it should be on now. So as I said, hello everybody. I'm very happy to be with you to share some of my research and personal experience that will be mostly based on climate justice from the perspective of social mobilizations and civil society engagements, as Elizabeth rightly introduced. So what I'm going to talk about is based on several years of research and involvement with climate and ecological movements. I must clarify, I'm a researcher, academic researcher in political ecology, but I'm also a political agent. So both within and outside university, I've been always explicit about my assumptions, normative goals, and ethical commitments of my work that aims to contribute to justice and equality. So in practice, I've been active in the movement Scientist Rebellion, and I have been involved in academics for Palestine during the last 2 years. So, as I said, I want to talk with you about climate justice from a specific perspective, from the level of civil society engagement, so from the level of the grassroots, of the bottom up. And for me, this means to discuss how social movements have organized and to trace the relevance of climate justice within social mobilizations. So on this basis, I want to share with you two main things. First, an historical account, a very schematic and short, for reasons of time, historical account of the progressive integration of climate justice principles in the broader climate movement and social movement landscape. And second, a reflection of what I think is increasingly central to civil society efforts to achieve climate justice from the bottom up. That is what I call, with others, an eco-social convergence. That also gives the title to this talk. So my central argument, just to put all the cards on the table, is that we urgently need, as activists, citizens, NGOs, associations, to work towards and to realize an eco-social convergence. But let me explain this right away. So with eco-social convergence, I mean the deliberate and intentional construction of collaborations and coalitions between different social movements and civil society organizations towards the elaboration of a shared horizon of the future, one based on solidarity and on an expanded practice of democracy that is capable of uniting very diverse movements and social actors in a common endeavor to achieve climate and social justice. So, in other words, an eco-social convergence is a process of hybrid politicization. That means social and political issues connected to poverty, discrimination, well-being, gender disparities become integrated into ecological and climate issues, and vice versa. So this process of eco-social convergence is both a strategy, but is also a way to describe what we have been witnessing that happened in recent years in terms of climate mobilizations. And I'm going to illustrate this to you. I must also be clear that the idea of an eco-social convergence comes actually from struggles, in particular from the struggles of the former GKN workers, a factory in Florence, that have started the process of social recompositions, alliance with climate movements, in order to increase their power to decide the kind of production they do in their factory, because they want to move from producing parts for cars to producing solar panel and cargo bikes. And in this process, they have involved researchers, activists, and have developed this agenda of eco-social convergence that then has been taken up by some academics and developed in relation to different strands of climate justice theory. So this is just to be clear, because here I will, as you will see, I will dialogue very often between more expert academic knowledge and activist and social movements knowledge. But let's go straight to it. So a short history. just to clarify how climate justice and social mobilizations have interacted a long time. So the roots of climate justice, as you probably know, lie in the environmental justice movement that emerged in the 1980s in the US from the struggles of minorities, Black people, Latinos, indigenous groups, against the disproportionate burden of pollution and contamination they suffered. So in these photographs, there is a very famous environmental justice hero, Reverend Ben Chavis, in Warren County in 1982, that is considered the place of birth of environmental justice. Then the concerns of environmental justice were taken up by NGOs, researchers, and citizens and translated on the global stage. So you had the term climate justice gaining prominence, especially after the 1999 report by Corporate Watch of Greenhouse Gangsters and Climate Justice, which criticized corporate solutions to climate change. So this story has been recounted also in some academic research, but basically what happened is that from the late 90s, calls for climate justice started spreading, and they were emphasizing the disproportionate impact of climate change on marginalized communities and shaping climate justice as a bridge between socioeconomic justice and environmental concerns. These concerns were then in subsequent years taken up also by states, among which Bolivia was particularly active by organizing in 2010 the World's People Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth, that delivered the People Agreement of Cochabamba, that still today, I urge you all to give a look to this document, because still today, this is one of the most comprehensive account of principles and pathways of implementation for a climate justice. So everything is already there. Then this wave, which was bringing climate justice also in the halls of power at the Conference of Parties, basically crashed in 2009 at the COP15 of Copenhagen, where countries could not agree on legally binding climate agreement. And the requests of global South countries were basically ignored. Market-based and growth-centered solutions to the climate crisis won across the board, and were lacking accountability and legally binding mechanisms. So from that defeat on, social movements started to localize. So instead of focusing on the COPs, on the Conference of Parties on climate change, they came back to the territories where they were operating, to the level of nation states. So we have in this period, after 2009, the proliferation of climate camps, but also of direct action tactics, the aim of which was to directly intervene in the processes that contribute to global warming in solidarity with marginalized communities around the world, and targeting primarily fossil fuel extraction and use. And the most prominent of these groups is, of course, Ende Gelände, a German coalition organizing mass direct action to block coal extraction, acting since about 2014. Then, moving on to 2018-2019, this is a very important decade, because this is when the climate movement became a mass phenomenon. During a wave of demonstration and civil disobedience action of 2018-19. There were two concomitant events, very important. One, it's the publication of the IPCC report 1.5 that details the difference between keeping a global average temperature at maximum 1.5 or going above to 2 degrees. And this report shows a massive difference in terms of impacts on local ecologies, and also it puts on the table the danger of tipping points. So it's a veritable warning to humanity. But it also says that we are still on time. We can still avoid the worst outcome of climate change if we decarbonize fast enough. Another event was an actual weather event, the heat wave that gripped the northern hemisphere between May and October 2018. And for many Europeans, maybe some of you remember, this was actually one of the first physical lived realization that climate change is actually real, because there was a heat that will not pass. And even in Denmark, where I live, it was quite massive. So in those years, we witnessed the rise of a globally coordinated mass movement demanding primarily decisive action on climate change mitigation and targeting national governments and corporations rather than the COPs. So the key words at that time were act now and follow the science, but also democratize decisions by devolving powers to citizen assembly. This wave was fueled and inspired by Extinction Rebellion, initially in UK and then spreading worldwide, and also by the rise of Fridays for Future, following Greta Thunberg's school strikes. The main tool to apply pressure were non-violent civil disobedience and mass demonstration. And as I said, the focus was on urgency, with demands to phase out fossil fuels, reaching net zero emission ahead of the targets proposed by governments, and also have a strong state intervention to regulate emissions. And science was the buzzword at that time. The incredible thing about this wave was that it was growing month by month and year by year without end in sight. It reached the acme during the week of the global climate strike in 2019, where more than 6 million people took the streets around the world. And we see in this period also that governments and corporations are actually taking notice of these massive mobilizations because they increase ambitions in emission reduction, declare climate emergencies. There are global pledges, Green New Deals, renewable energies take off. It seemed like an unstoppable wave that was putting climate at the top of the political agenda. This period is also important because we see Fridays for Future putting emphasis on the MAPA, the most affected people and areas. So trying to clarify that those who are going to pay the most from climate change are actually those that are least responsible, meaning people and communities in the global south. And we also see from Extinction Rebellion a shift beyond governments to target actually financial institutions and banks guilty of propping up the continuous expansion of fossil fuel. And so it seems all things are going so good. We're going to grow. We're going to actually make it. And then what happened? We got the pandemic. The pandemic lockdown basically halted this wave in its course. It forced us in the house. It stopped mass demonstration. And since then, we have not seen comparable numbers of protesters in the streets. And furthermore, states and corporations also seizing the opportunity of the pandemic started to co-opt or neutralize the demands of the movements. And so an eco-modernist agenda was rising that was focused on new technologies, market instruments, economic growth, and this filled the space of climate politics. So pretty basically we had an ecological transition from above being imposed. And if we look at the actual emission curve, that was also a complete failure. So jumping forward, more recently, the year 2021, 2022, we start seeing and hybridization of climate campaigns with social issues. So since the post-pandemic period, climate movement have reduced the focus on mass demonstration and instead adopting methods of non-violent civil disobedience more forcefully. And also the active groups are smaller in numbers, but they are more focused and more willing to disrupt. Also, and crucially, the demands are no longer focused only on climate change mitigation as a big national policy, but are much more specific. And so I want to go with you through some of these eco-social campaigns of these years to show it. For example, in 2021, UK Insulate Britain, a civil disobedience campaign, advocated for home retrofitting policies, but specifically asked to prioritize social housing and low-income households. Then we had Just Stop Oil in 2022, opposing new oil and drilling, but also collaborating with charities and trade unions to deal with the cost of living crisis. Next, we had the Extinction Rebellion creating trade unions groups, which aimed to unite climate and labor struggles and to engage with workers during strikes for wage increases, but at the same time trying to influence the unions to propose bottom-up ecological transition plans. And so we see here ecological planning also gaining traction among activists. Another very important and influential campaign, it's since 2021, a branch of Fridays for Future Germany collaborating with the Union of Public Transport Workers, Verdi, in the campaign Wir fahren zusammen, Let's Move Together, that was advocating for increased public transport investment, better public transport workers' conditions, and so uniting transport workers and climate activists. More of this. Scientist Rebellion, of which I'm also part of. It's a branch of Extinction Rebellion that mobilizes scientists and academics, and they started by leveraging science to ask for more rapid climate action, but since then have moved. And so since 2022, we started the campaign Stop Private Jets with the demand that private jets should be highly taxed or banned altogether, since they represent luxury emissions from the rich and also a low-hanging fruit for decarbonization policies that should start from the most polluting and less useful activities. And so this campaign has the broader aim of making clear the inequality in emissions within countries and also how these are tied to wealth. So the most important point from this campaign is that social issues are becoming increasingly integral and a structuring part of the demands and goals of climate movements. So the aim is to connect climate policy with the experience and concerns of ordinary citizens, clarifying the greater responsibility of the wealthy for climate breakdown and making them accountable, focusing on fairness in the ecological transition. That means a fair distribution of burdens and benefits of the transition. And I think this indicates a shift in the broad climate movement. It's no longer just about mitigating climate change and therefore eliminating fossil fuels. That is still crucial, but it is about fusing together environmental, social, and economic issues into a comprehensive climate justice political platform. Also because climate activists understood that the ecological transition, the decarbonization agenda, must be fair and equitable. Because it must hold the most responsible accountable and not being shifted in terms of costs on the working class. Actually, the ecological transition should offer a better future to the working class. A further shift happened from 2023, where we have a further integration of climate action, climate justice, social issues, and internationalist solidarity. And the clearest instance of this further integration is the convergence of climate, social, and political movements around the opposition to the ongoing genocide of Palestinian people by Israel and against the growing wartime regime in the West and beyond. So we have here internationalism, anti-colonialism, and anti-militarism that are central and historical elements of a climate justice platform that provide the framework for the broader climate movement to organize, support, and contribute to the Palestine solidarity movement. And so we have seen this happening all around the world with groups like Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, Scientist Rebellion, but also local and national climate and ecological groups being very clear that the destruction of Palestine and the destruction of the earth go hand in hand because they are legitimized and carried out by the same actors, responding to the same logic of Western hegemonic control, colonial appropriation, and they carry the same disregard for certain lives compared to others, so contributing to violating human rights on a huge scale. So in Denmark, where I live, we had pretty successful campaigns. One of these is Mask Off Maersk. Maersk is a logistical shipping company that actually brings weapons on a daily basis to Israel, and it's Danish owned. And so we tried to show this by occupying their headquarters. Greta joined us in one of these activity, further signaling the convergence between climate and pro-Palestine solidarity activism. And finally, we also started to connect the dots and blocking arms factory in this country. Related to this fight, another front is gaining increasing relevance, and that is the new war regime and militarization agenda that, we like it or not, is also being promoted by the European Union at the sound of 800 billion euros of investments in the coming years, that not only is subordinating decarbonization goals and wealth distribution to the war economy, but also contributes to an expansion and a hardening of the support of the West to arms production. So, can Europe claim climate leadership? The new force seems to be international security. So it's up to us, to the people of Europe, to remind the European institutions the kind of commitments they have taken in the past with their constituencies. Now, climate movement are taking notice of all this, and climate justice offers the framework to address genocide and ecocide as two sides of the same coin, and to fight against militarization and war as enemies, not just of decarbonization, but of life in general. So just to conclude, do I have more time?
Not too much, Salvatore.
Okay, so that's my last slide. My last slide. I want to just say very shortly why the political projects of climate justice needs to be framed within a strategy of eco-social convergence. So the main argument is, of course, we need more people to join together and to have some strategic unity in order to be strong enough. But then there are also political reasons. First, an eco-social climate justice perspective brings more people together, because an agenda that is based on fairness in allocation of cost and benefits, and that provide material benefits for the most marginalized, has more chances to unite society and increase impact, capacity, and collective intelligence. A second reason is that if we fail to put also social concern at the center of the ecological transition agenda, we risk a backlash, as we have seen in France with Gilets jaunes. So if working class cannot see material benefits, but just costs, it won't be on board for the ecological transition. And the last reason is that we, pretty explicitly and maybe harshly, we need an eco-social agenda to avoid ending up in a fascist regimes. Because if these states, the liberal states of the West, have proven incapable of addressing the social aspects of the climate crisis, people will turn to those who offer solutions, right-wing political parties that are, of course, unethical and horrible solutions, but are still solutions. So if we fail to implement social alliances, we really risk to give the space to right-wing formation. And thank you. I will end up with just this slide.
Thanks a lot, Salvatore. I see there would be much more information to share and much more knowledge that you could share with us.
Sorry if I took more than what I was allowed.
Very interesting, though. Can you please stop the screen sharing so that we can see people again? Thanks for that. Thanks for the start. And maybe to all of you, if you have questions, please feel very much invited to share them in the chat or comments or thoughts on Salvatore's input, but also later on the two other inputs that we're going to have. So if there is any questions that you want us to discuss later on, with the three speakers, or if there is any comment or any thought or any additional information you want to share with us, please use the chat so that there is some interaction possible. Great. So let me jump to our next speaker straight away. And we are very happy to have Andrea Pletea with us. And she is from the Environment and Human Rights Academy. And she's going to share some information on the interconnection between climate justice, degrowth, and democracy with us. So again, very important topics and words connected to this huge topic we're talking about today. And she will also share a practical example of a Erasmus Plus project that they did related to climate justice. So we are very curious also to listen to this practical side of our topic. Andrea, nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and really wonderful to hear from my fellow panelists. I also have a presentation that I'll share. I think you are able to see my screen. Great. So hello, everyone. Again, it's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Andrea. I work as a program manager for the Environment and Human Rights Academy, or TERRA. We're a nonprofit. We're working on environmental education with young people, mainly secondary education and their educators. So whether that's informal or non-formal education. And our approach is informed by systems thinking and environmental justice. And today I would like to contribute to this very important conversation on climate justice and democracy through my experience working on a climate storytelling project in schools. So I will give you first a snapshot of the climate change education landscape and its challenges, and how we tried to contribute to overcoming these through our project, which is called ICE. So first, in our work, we use the EU Green Comp framework. Some of you may already be familiar with it as one of our guiding tools. So the Green Comp framework identifies 12 interconnected sustainability competencies. So it goes from knowing about sustainability to systems thinking and political agency. But research about the Green Comp implementation shows a consistent pattern across European curricula. So competencies around valuing sustainability tend to be well addressed, but then when we look at other competencies around acting for sustainability or futures envisioning are far less addressed. So here, acting for sustainability includes competencies such as political agency, collective action, and individual initiative. And research has also found that when collective action is being addressed in schools, it tends to be mainly through low impact collective action and activities like differentiated waste management. So this uneven implementation of competencies is a problem for climate change education, of course, but I think it also speaks to a deep gap in citizenship education. Now, when we look at how climate change is generally taught, we see several systemic issues. So first of all, climate change is often taught in a siloed way, mainly within natural science subjects. So this leads to an overfocus on biophysical facts and processes, and it leaves on the side the really important socioeconomic dimensions, historical patterns of inequality and exclusion, and colonial legacies. And then key scientific concepts such as the carbon budget, planetary boundaries, tipping points, they're often not addressed in climate change education. And third, students tend to be overwhelmed or even numbed with a variety of climate change facts and events, but are rarely offered a really systemic analysis of the crisis. So this means that students rarely explore the root causes of the crisis, who's responsible, who suffer most, who is resisting, and what solutions already exist. Instead, students tend to be presented with individual actions that in practice have minimal impact and can often lead to feeling guilty because we can never really do enough by ourselves. Or they're promised that green growth will fix everything, a promise that empirical research shows that doesn't hold up. And of course, teachers themselves face constraints. They already do so much, but they're burdened by overloaded curricula, lack of preparation time, they have little training on more holistic climate education, and they also experience a lack of relevant climate change classroom resources. And then eco-anxiety is another concern among teachers. So many tell us that they fear triggering eco-anxiety in students if they talk about the real magnitude of the crisis or its systemic dimensions. But eco-anxiety ultimately is a normal response to the world that we're living in. And research has also shown that moderate eco-anxiety can actually lead to engagement when people see pathways for action. And all of these really matter for climate justice and for democracy. So teachers tells us that some students roll their eyes at climate topics, but the feedback that we have received from students and teachers is that actually climate justice is a dimension that is missing in school climate change education and is often of interest. And we believe that every student should have access to this kind of systemic insights, and not just those who are passionate about these causes, those who have an exceptional teacher, go to a very special school, or come from an environmentally minded family. And this is the context in which we created the ICE project. So ICE stands for Empowering Youth Through Environmental Storytelling. And we created this project with our partner News Decoder, which is a youth journalism organization. And ICE is an Erasmus Plus project designed to improve students' climate literacy, but also strengthen their civic engagement. And we try to do this by combining systems and social justice informed climate education with storytelling and journalism. The project started almost 2 years ago and is about to end in December. So the idea is simple. Storytelling can turn young people from passive receivers of climate information into active interpreters and creators of meaning, and even into change makers. Because through storytelling, students can take climate data, patterns of injustice, and bring them to life. Through their stories, they can also challenge dominant narratives and bring to the forefront systemic and just solutions to the climate crisis. And these stories could take the format of an article, a podcast, or a video, so whatever suits their ideas and their interests. And our curriculum includes ready-to-use teaching notes, activities, slides, further resources on climate science, climate justice, systems thinking, degrowth, donut economics. Also, we bring together a list of a compilation of examples of systemic and just action from around the world. And we also offer step-by-step guides on how to find and shape your story, how to do interviewing, how to create articles, videos, or podcasts. And you can find all these resources at the link in the chat, and we're in the process of uploading the final versions. And this curriculum has been tested and further updated in different learning settings in different countries. So in Belgium, in Portugal, Slovenia, Serbia, Kosovo, but also in Colombia and Kenya. Our approach in ICE tries to be both critical and empowering. So we encourage learners to really go upstream to the root causes of the climate crisis rather than staying at the level of symptoms. So through systems thinking and justice, students learn how the global and the local can connect, who is responsible for climate change, and how climate change is experienced differently depending on vulnerability and power. We unpack the concept of the individual carbon footprint to highlight the transformational potential of collective action instead, but also show how individual initiative is so important to achieve systemic change. We also support educators directly. So recently we hosted a 2.5-day training for educators from all around Europe, where we explored various topics from our course, but also we started building a community, and teachers really stressed how important this space was, because working on these topics by yourself can become heavy. And one theme that resonated deeply with educators was degrowth. So the idea that to thrive on a finite planet and to achieve global justice, global north countries need to democratically rethink our economic priorities. So achieving climate justice requires degrowth in the global north, where patterns of overproduction and overconsumption driven by economic expansion continue to drive global ecological destruction and inequality. And teachers found this framing truly inspiring and also potentially really empowering for students. So now let me share a few concrete examples of what we did in ICE. So the first activity here is a democratic economy activity. So a key tenet of degrowth is that citizens should have more of a say in how the economy is organized. So in this very simple activity, students or teachers work in groups to reflect on different economic sectors. So it could be education, private jets, electric vehicles, agriculture, public libraries. And their task is together to discuss and deliberate whether each of these sectors should shrink, transform, or grow if the goal is to achieve well-being for all within planetary boundaries. And we found that it's a simple but very powerful way to get people to put their citizen hats on and to start to think together about what kind of economy do we actually need to be able to thrive on this planet. Another activity that we facilitated that we really enjoyed was letter exchanges among students from Colombia, Slovenia, and Kenya. So students exchanged letters about how climate change affects their regions. Then they wrote about each other's experience. So students reflected not only on heat waves and impacts on food and water security, but also on the loss of cultural practices tied to nature. And this is an activity that students really enjoyed and also told us that it helped them make climate justice a more concrete idea and concept. And then finally, in the last photo, we have students, our pilot students from Kenya who visited the Karura forest, which is also known as Nairobi's green lungs. And after their visit, they wrote a story connecting local biodiversity issues with global tipping points. And across all these experiences, our core message is that environmental education should cultivate agency. Now, we would like to invite you, if you're an educator, whether in schools or non-formal learning centers, and if you'd like to work with us to bring some of these activities into your learning environment, please reach out. You have my email address on the slides, and we'll try to support you in any way we can. So in the chat, we'll find a link to our ICE website, where, as I said, we're in the process of uploading our resources. There's also a link to our project LinkedIn page, and give us a follow as we'll soon announce an event. It will be an online screening of the Cost of Growth documentary, which showcases environmental justice actions from all around the world. And I want to close with some words from my journalist colleague, Amina Makoli from News Decoder, because I think it captures the spirit of what we try to do in ICE beautifully. So we invite educators to be brave in their teaching and to lean on our curriculum for support. Students need to understand the root causes of the climate crisis so they know where to go in their future careers and in the values that will guide their lives. Young people need to engage with stories as authors and as listeners, because storytelling is how we understand ourselves, why we act the way we do, and what on earth we're going to do about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for the very interesting connections and also the very concrete practical example and the invitation for all of us to get in contact and to connect. And I think this is one of the most powerful needs we have to cooperate, to work together, to use this power of togetherness. And maybe also linked to that, we saw in the registrations that there were many questions, or was quite a high interest in showing and learning about some practical examples. So thanks for sharing this with us. Again, the invitation for everybody, and I see that there is some comments in the chat, and there is some links in the chat also. And Andrea, your links were also posted in the chat. So in case some of you want to look at the resources or use some of them or connect to some of the informations, please feel free to do so. And again, if there is some questions, if you have any comments or thoughts on what is shared here, please use the chat for that. Great. So we have one more speaker for today, and I'm very happy to have Emer Manning with us. And she's from the National Youth Council of Ireland. And she's especially bringing in the youth perspective and the youth perception of democracy. So also linking very important keywords to that. And one of the aspects you're going to talk about, as I'm informed on, is that it's about the problem of punishing peaceful climate protests in a very disproportionate way. So that's what it is. So, Emer, looking forward to some information from your side.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome everybody. While I get my slides up, I want to ask you all a very quick favor. I'm going to take you through my presentation in 3 steps: global, regional, and local. And would I be able to ask everybody, seeing as we're all from all over the world, to please type your country or your city into the chat so we can see where everybody is from in this global solidarity space together, please. France, Copenhagen, Denmark, amazing. Portugal, Belgium, Italy. Wow, so many. Incredible. Let me get the chat open there so I can keep seeing. Amazing. Austria/Bolivia, Azerbaijan, UK and Poland, Turkey, Romania, Greece. Oh my goodness, so many amazing people from amazing places. Thank you so much. It's great to visualize across the world where everybody is dotted. I can't see anybody right now when I'm like this, but can I get somebody to confirm that you can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be talking to you today from the National Youth Council of Ireland. I'm based in Dublin, the capital of Ireland, and I'm going to talk to you about youth climate justice. But before I start, I just wanted to mention, what is youth? Like, what defines a young person in terms of age? Because it actually varies quite a lot. So in Ireland, a young person is considered a young person up until the age of 24. In Europe, it's a little bit different. Some people will say it's up until the age of 29, and others would say it's up until the age of 30. But internationally, if we look globally, young people go all the way up to the age of 35. So I'm still a young person for a couple more years, and then I won't be anymore. But I'm going to jump straight into the global part of our story. I also just want to say, because it will be relevant for later on, I do work as the Climate Justice Officer in the National Youth Council of Ireland, but my background is actually in marine sustainability. So how climate change affects the different creatures that live in our global ocean. And while that might seem irrelevant for now, it will come up later in the story. So part 1, global. I want to focus this on democracy because it really is the cornerstone of politics, and climate justice is completely intertwined with politics, whether your opinion on global politics is a good one or a bad one. Unfortunately, it's a little bit irrelevant because everything is pretty much intertwined with politics. However, research conducted at Harvard University and the University of Melbourne shows that young people today have the least trust in democracy than any other age group. And I have a quote here from a sociologist and youth researcher, Klaus Hürlimann, who says, "In Germany, we are not succeeding. We are not the only ones, but it is very noticeable here. To involve young people in political life where decisions are actually being made, where power is being exercised, and where the course for the future is being set. In these arenas, younger generations are not represented." And if you are a young person, how can you fully trust and advocate for something that routinely excludes you? However, just because young people may not fully trust democracy, and that's an entire different conversation for an entire different day, this does not mean that they don't care. As we heard from my previous two fellow speakers, youth voices are really at the heart of the climate change movement and the climate justice movement. So both Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future started with many young people at the helm, actively taking the time and having the passion to set up these grassroots organizations into being what they are today, where millions upon millions of people have joined in with these protests, demonstrations, etc. I'm going to move from global now to regional. That was just to give you a bit of a taste of the global atmosphere, but my two colleagues before that have done a better job in the global part than I will. So I'm going to move to regional. The government of Iceland started seeing a lot of these newspaper headlines pop up. I'm going to read them very quickly. So we have preventative detention under the convention. Recent police action against climate activists violates the European Court of Human Rights case law. Europe's climate activists face repressive tide. Watchdogs warn of rights violations as governments crack down on disruptive protests. European governments are using harsh, overly broad laws to silence climate protesters. Climate activists are given unprecedented prison sentences for non-violent protest. And then finally, alarm as German climate activists are charged with forming a criminal organization. So the government of Iceland saw all these headlines and realized that on a Council of Europe level, there's a lot of recommendations that the Council of Europe has to its member states. However, none of them really involved looking at young people and climate together. They looked at them sometimes separately, but never together. So the government of Iceland set up a fund to create a drafting group where they would bring together a multitude, about 10 young people together to draft a recommendation on young people and climate action. And I was one of the young people that got to sit on that drafting group back in 2022. But ultimately, what it stemmed from was a really, really horrific case in Berlin, in Germany, where a big climate protest was being organized by youth activists, and law enforcement in Berlin caught wind of this. They heard that it was being planned. And what they did was they discussed with lawmakers in Berlin how they could stop the protest before it even began. So they declared that these climate activists were forming a criminal organization. And what that enabled them to do was arrest and detain the young organizers of the protests for 30 days. So what they did was 15 days before the protest, they arrested and detained all of the organizers and held them in prison until 15 days after the protest was supposed to have ended, and then released them. So the young people decided to remobilize in the wake of this and try to move their protest instead to Munich. And Munich brought in the same law. So those protests, which by the way were planned to be entirely peaceful protests, couldn't go ahead because these young people were labeled as a criminal organization. On the back of this, that's where Iceland stepped in with this recommendation. And the Criminal Rights International report said instead of jailing climate protesters and undermining civil liberties, governments should heed their call to take urgent action to address the climate crisis. And that's what our recommendation with the Council of Europe tries to do. So The recommendation aims to protect young people and remove barriers to their participation in climate-related decision-making processes. And it's the first time in history that a recommendation of this nature is even needed. It focuses on the climate and biodiversity crises, the right of peaceful assembly and protest for young people, and it also asks that consideration is given to the specific needs of all young people, especially those from marginalised, vulnerable or disadvantaged groups, including Indigenous youth and asylum seekers. It was also interesting because there's also some subheadings within the recommendation for training, for example, for those who work in law enforcement, for those who work in the court system, and also for youth workers to try and allow all of these different cohorts to better understand some of these, what might look like more extreme forms of protest, like gluing yourself to a road or throwing paint over or soup over famous paintings. But it's to understand that these things are still peaceful. They might be disruptive, but there's an effective way to be disruptive, and young people are finding that, but still in a peaceful way. So the disproportionate response that they have gotten from law enforcement is not appropriate, and that's what this recommendation looks at, is the systemic issues on how do we ensure that everybody understands that there are different ways of doing peaceful protest. Part 3 is local. And this is going to be a personal example of one of the projects that I've been working on in the National Youth Council. So we run the Future Generations Climate Justice Project. The departments or the ministries in Ireland have shifted since this, but it was previously funded by the Department of Children and Youth. But it's a consortium project, so you can see all of our partners down here on the bottom and all of our different funders. And this project was established in 2020, and it explores and highlights the systemic and human rights issues related to the climate crisis with young people, youth workers, and youth organisations. And the project brings together the voices of young people who are often missing from the climate discourse, particularly at a global policy level, such as young people from marginalised, rural, and disadvantaged backgrounds. And to make it a bit more personal, I'd like to introduce you to the partners and the young people that we worked with. So the first was YMCA Ireland. So the young people from YMCA are all from rural areas, and they're at huge risk of isolation, and they often feel very excluded from formal decision-making processes that are very capital city centric. So all of our main government buildings would be in Dublin, but these young people live on the furthest corners of the country of Ireland from Dublin, and often feel left out. Then we also have Goshka, the President's Award. So this group or this organization merges the formal and non-formal education aspects. So in NYCI, we are non-formal education. Goshka are more formal. So we're able to achieve both in this partnership together. So they would reach out to school students and teachers and principals with climate justice information and education. Then we have Concern Worldwide and their One Planet for All project. They connect the young people as part of this project with communities in the global south, particularly youth in the global south. So we can have that local to global or glocal approach. And we do a lot of shared living of experiences. So we're looking at how young people in Kenya are kind of combating climate injustice in their region and then comparing it to what we're doing here in Ireland and kind of sharing lessons learned from both sides. And the group that I want to focus on today is Sphere 17. Sphere 17 are an urban youth organization. They have multiple different urban centres, and mostly all of their urban centres are in areas where their young people and their families are from hugely socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds. The young people here that they might have narcotics or alcohol abuse themselves, their family members might be involved in narcotics and alcohol abuse. A lot of them have issues with like risk of becoming in trouble with the law or risk of leaving education, formal education. So most of the young people we work with here are very disillusioned with education and or politics. I can see that somebody is drawing on the screen. Thank you for stopping. That's great. But the one thing that I want to look at kind of from start to finish was the process that we had with them for bringing them through a climate justice project, because it's one of those times where you really have to meet young people where they're at. When I first met these young people, it wasn't necessarily appropriate for me to come in and immediately start dumping climate change and climate justice information on them. A lot of them have their own problems at home, and coming in with further global problems just was not the right approach. So how we did it was each year we pick a different theme, a different topic to focus on. And the young people found out about my background in marine science. So they said they wanted to focus on SDG 14, life below water. So we sat down and with the young people with a cup of tea, and we bought them in some pizza and we said, okay, I want you to have a think about water. What is something that upsets you in your own daily life about water, that annoys you, and that makes you like sad? And one of the young people put their hand up and said, my mother thinks that the government is putting things in our water, so she won't let us drink water from the tap, from the sink. So is there any way that we could, so we have to always buy bottled water. My mum just keeps buying bottled water, but I hate the plastic that's used in bottled water. I hear a lot about microplastics and I don't want to be drinking them. So is there any way that we could see if our water actually is contaminated with stuff that the government is putting in it? So everybody got really interested in this. So what we did was we went and we bought these test kits, these really detailed test kits where you could test your water. And everybody went home with their test kits and they tested their tap water at home and found out their water was perfectly clean. That was the first thing. And then they came back and said, but what about our sea water? Because we live by the coast, but none of us want to go into the ocean because we all think that it's dirty and that there's sewage in there and we don't want to go. So then we took our project to the next level. And what we did was we decided to introduce them to some marine life that lived off the coast of Ireland. So I'm working on it in the background here, but I'm about to fill this tank up with starfish and sea stars and urchins and different marine animals that are local to Ireland. And we actually let the young people hold them and get really up close with them. And like for many who live by the coast, it was their first time ever seeing an actual ocean creature. There's a little starfish being held there. We brought them out on board a ship out around the coast of Howth, which is their local area, and we tested the water at multiple different spots in Howth to see what was the water like. And interestingly, the water was completely clean, completely clear, apart from one issue. And that issue was KH, which is carbonate hardness, which you might not have heard of before. But when we saw that the KH in Irish coastal water was really, really low, way lower than it should have been, all of the young people got really interested in researching what does that mean? What is KH and what does it affect? And it turns out that KH is needed by shellfish like oysters, clams, crabs. It's needed by them to actually form their shells. And when they did even more research into it, they realized that mussels and clams and oysters can do huge amounts of water cleaning per day. Like they can clean 200 liters of water an hour, which was insane. And they realized that if our shellfish suffered, then so would the quality of our water. So what they did was, I've never seen a group of young people who, bear in mind, were at risk of dropping out of school, were at risk of being in trouble with law enforcement here. I've never seen a group of young people switch so quickly to be really interested in caring for shellfish. And they got so impassioned by it that beforehand they never wanted to speak to anybody in government before. But immediately they went, we want to speak to the minister on this. So we invited the minister, who was the one that, there he is actually here testing the water. And he was the one that funded this project. And he came in and he sat down to meet with them face to face, and they explained all about the water testing and the shellfish to him. And now, 2 years later, they're still doing a climate justice project with us, looking at, oh, I think somebody covered over my slides. Sorry, something's in the chat there about clear my drawings. Unfortunately, I can't see it. Can I? Clear all drawings. No, my slide's gone. But that was actually my last slide anyway. But they became so impassioned by this idea of the local climate justice that now they're also moving into the global climate justice arena. I'll stop sharing anyway because it's my last slide. But now what they're doing is they're actually doing pen pal ship by video to and from communities in Asia, the Arctic, for indigenous Sami communities, and Africa. So this has grown into like broadening their mind, broadening their world, bearing also in mind that a lot of their families and their direct parents were probably a little bit more far right leaning. But now through just the experience of getting to actually discuss different issues that are happening on a global level, these young people are starting to broaden their own sense of the world within that. So that's my favorite example of a local approach to climate justice that can really go far for young people. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for having me. I'll pass back to Elizabeth.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the very interesting, very concrete and very local example of young people being involved and seeing that it makes a difference to be involved. And I think this is a very important lesson learned. Well, it would be great to have some minutes to maybe also exchange a bit on the talks we had. And so, yes, it would be great if Andrea and also Salvatore could join us back on our virtual panel for a moment. And it was very interesting to listen from these different approaches and also to these different perspectives you shared with us. And maybe I would like to just raise the question again back to the beginning of our webinar. We were talking about how climate justice can strengthen democracy. So maybe I would really like to ask you this question once again, listening to the other speakers, but also out of your experience, how climate justice could strengthen democracy, or maybe is it the other way around? Does it need democracy in order to allow or to support climate justice? So anybody would have a thought on that?
Maybe I can start
Please go on.
if you want. So I really want to thank you, my other co-speakers, because their interventions were super, super interesting and very hands-on, and I learned a lot. And also, I was thinking of connections between my research and the topics raised and about democracy. The last 2 years, I actually have been studying the repression and criminalization of climate activism in Denmark. And so the first thing that comes to mind when talking about democracy and climate justice is that there is a role for climate justice activists in defending actually democracy because it is true that unfortunately there is ongoing global wave of authoritarian turn of governments, even in countries that are nominally speaking up for human rights in other parts of the world, but in their own within their own boundaries are sometimes disrespecting basic human and political rights. So the defense of democracy is actually and the defense of a public space in which is safe to express opinions, also through disruptive methods that we know because there has been a lot of specification of the European Court of Human Rights and the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations that mild disruption does not amount to crime and does not amount to violence. So these are actually the tools that historically have been produced to save the public space and in the case of big crisis, to actually being able to intervene as citizens when things are not changing and need to change. And so defense of democracy is part of climate justice, and it's also a way to connect with other groups like workers groups that also face an increasing repression. And so the fight against repression, it's also a platform to recompose different movements and to work towards that convergence of social and political forces I was talking about. And the last thing, maybe in terms of connection to degrowth instead, it is true that for degrowth ideas about how to redesign our world, direct democratic power on the job place is one of the most important, so that workers can actually have a say in what they produce and how.
Thanks a lot for that. So the needs to make it possible. Are there any thoughts on additional thoughts on that? How climate justice can strengthen democracy, or if it is the other way around?
Yeah, I'm going to twist the question just ever so slightly, but I'll come back to this. But it's more so something that I really want to have us all remember is if you think back to when you were a teenager, you were 15, 16, 17, 18, not only were you trying to find your place in the world, but you were also trying to discover how does the broader world around you actually work? How does it operate? And politics is one of those things that typically young people get interested in politics a bit later in life. It's not something that they're super interested in commonly when they're 15 years old. But the one thing that I always think about is when I was growing up, there was a huge pushback against authoritarianism and the far right. But now it's becoming more commonplace. We're starting to see a shift, which will always happen. There'll always be shifts to and from each way when people realize that things aren't working the way they'd like them to work. But the fact now that we're having people who are in the highest presidency seats in some of the most wealthy and powerful countries in the world that can speak their mind through racism and misogyny, anti-immigrant, you name it. The fact that young people are now seeing how much support those people are getting is quite worrying. And the second thing is like worrying for democracy. But the second thing is there's a new trend that's happening in this age of social media and attention economy where people are trying to grab your attention, but it's also trying to grab you to be part of a community. Because a lot of the time now with social media, it's kind of siloed us into our own communities and people are saying, no, you should come over here. But one thing that we have found through working with a wonderful organization in Ireland called the Hope and Courage Collective, they study how people are recruiting others into far-right movements. But one thing that they found was that there's actually a rise in far-right environmentalists, which many of us wouldn't really think go together. But essentially, there were so many young people coming up that had climate at the forefront of their mind as a thing that they cared about. And the far right said, okay, well, how do we get those young people in here to show them that we care about climate? And they've used a very, very old technique called eco-bordering, which was actually brought about in the Nazi era in Germany, where they said that we care so much about our homeland and our environment. I don't agree with this, by the way, I'm just telling you what it is. But if we keep bringing immigrants into our country, they're not going to care about our country as much as we do. So we should close the borders for ecological purposes to keep our country and our environment safe. And unfortunately, a lot of people are buying into this. And it might not be something that's really well known now, but it will continue to adapt and evolve to try and find different ways to recruit young people into these concepts. So when I come back to your question about how does climate justice impact democracy or injustice impact no democracy, it's so incredibly systemic. Like, we don't have to just focus on the climate justice in front of us. We also have to focus on the justice in social media and the justice in education and the justice in day-to-day lives and everything. and just general media. It's really hard. But the one thing that I would always say is that the extremist groups, both far right and far left, are very, very good at being vocal online in particular. But I think that actually people who are more just right, just left, and just centric need to do the same, because we need to show that the extremes aren't the norm, the middle is. And we need to all kind of work together in that aspect to make young people realize that that is more of the norm. Sorry, I went on a bit long there, but I hope that made sense.
Thanks a lot also for the importance of media, social media, and the different tools we use and we have. Andrea, do you want also to add on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll quickly comment from the perspective of education. And again, thank you so much for the really interesting presentations. So we think that systemic education, so environmental education that's informed by systems thinking, is really helpful for students to understand the fact that the problems that we're experiencing today, the socio-environmental crisis, they're really the result of a system that's not working on the one hand, but it has been put in place by us. So in a sense, when we come together, we can definitely, there is the potential to change those systems. But as Emer was saying, what do we replace it with? So in that sense, climate justice is really important because it brings to the forefront really the values of solidarity, of care, of equity that should guide education and also the way in which we show up in our democracies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks also from the perspective of education, and as you shared this cool project with us, also from this angle. Very interesting. I see that there are some people who wanted to ask a question. It would be fantastic if you could share the question with us so we can see it and we can connect to it. So that would be super interesting. For the moment, maybe one question connected to what you have said before, also on the media topic, but also on the different movements you shared with us, Salvatore and Imam, talking about media. Maybe one more question on, so how can we support to create this just and sustainable solidarity? So what is our task? What is a concrete need from us as working with young people, as working in the youth field, as working as researchers? So how can we support this a just solidarity, a just development? And Ima, you were connecting it to media already, but maybe also looking at it from other perspectives. So also to support the resilience and democracy, so very important needs in nowadays society.
Yeah, from my experience, it depends on the young people that you're working with. But I do feel that a lot of young people, they feel like they are not and should not be included in politics and democracy. A lot of the time, it kind of feels like an us as adults and them as young people, and they're not mature enough. They don't know enough. They're not ready to handle the weight of democracy and voting, etc. Like in most European countries, there's still an age limit of being older than 18 or older to vote. And there's a lot of European countries now that are trying to bring in a Vote at 16 campaign to try and enable younger people to have a voice in democracy, because it's meant to be a voice for everyone, provided you're older than 18, which is an asterisk that leaves out 20% of some populations. So I think it's twofold. I think it's number one is if your young people cannot vote, finding ways to include them in democracy that still lets them use their voice, still lets them maybe give them the tools even to learn how to write a formal letter to a minister, or write a formal letter to a councillor, or engage with them on social media. Or how do we as a youth group apply for funding? If you have knowledge on how there's youth funding out there, how do you apply for it? That could be a huge benefit to those young people feeling included. So I suppose it's mentoring young people so that they feel like they are a valuable part of a community. If they don't feel that value, then they won't want to protect that community.
Yeah, if I can jump in, because I feel really sympathetic to what Eamon just said. Indeed, I do think it even climate protection starts from the protection of local ecologies. And this is often something I speak with my students, because it can seem overwhelming to deal with climate change. It's such a global, interconnected, hard to grasp, hard to deal with issue. It can be really demotivating. But the point is that every time a local ecosystem is prevented from destruction, is protected by local community action, that is actually helping preventing climate change. And all these start, as Eamon also was mentioning, with knowledge. So I think a very good way to start connecting young people with issues of climate and ecological politics is to learn about the actual territories and ecologies and ecosystems where one lives. So it cross education, but also cross municipal action and plans, but it also cross the media and journalism. For example, having a small independent media project, sometimes I've participated in, is very useful to engage young people to learn more about the place where they come from, and then giving it an ecological flavor by better understanding what are the resources, what are the areas to protect, what are the special features. Also, because it's only by learning a place and about the beauty of the place that one also feels compelled to protect that place. And then another approach is also to learn about our connections. So there is an incredible ignorance that is fueled by the kind of advertising industry, of where commodities come from. How come do we have smartphones and computers that cost so little, or avocados in Denmark? In learning about the connections between places and how commodities are made, and what are why the labor costs in Latin America are so lower compared to Denmark, and how this translates in the life and in life in Copenhagen, for example. I think it's the first step also to start asking some ethical questions. Is this right? That there are some people working for free for me, and so tracing this connection, and again, media projects, small research projects can go in this direction to engage the youth.
Thanks a lot. So also the importance of open our eyes and contributing and also investing and taking part in small local project and connecting with each other. Thanks for that. Well, thanks a lot for the short but very nice discussion and deepening a bit the different aspects you brought in during your inputs and informations. So thanks a lot for your contributions and for the topic. There would be much more to say. And I see that there's also discussions ongoing in the chat and also some connections. So I think that's also a good starting point. We are about to close this webinar. There is another webinar, one last one for this year, going to take place the 3rd of December. So if you are interested, please join us and register for the next one too. And Tali was super nice. She already posted some information in the chat connected to the Youth Pass. So in case you need a confirmation, which would be the Youth Pass, please contact SALTO. Information is in the chat connected to that. And if you have a short moment to evaluate on this webinar, we would be super thankful, and also to work on upcoming editions. Thanks a lot for your time, for your input, for your discussions, for sharing. And I hope you have some more connections and some more thoughts to work with and to go on with for the next few weeks and the next year, and to continue working on this super important topic together. Enjoy your afternoon and hope to see you for the next webinar. Thanks, Salvatore, for joining us. Thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Imar.